I want to just cover two more categories, and then I will, in fact, turn it over. Mr. Peavy, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the opportunity, but also the challenges around this issue of smart meters. The New York Times, of course, reported last week that consumers are arguing that some meters are logging far more kilowatt hours than they believe that they are using, and that this technology is in fact imperfect. And what's your view, and what are you doing about it? That's one issue. Let me lay out the other one, and then you can take them both so I can turn it over to other members. I'd like to just know your general view, without getting into any specific cases, about the issue of environmental justice, especially as it applies to the siting of energy facilities. I am thinking of a specific instance relating to the siting of natural gas facilities. But whether or not, how you balance the need for the energy, the need for a commodity, with the interests of a particular affected neighborhood when it comes to siting.
Okay, well, let's take the question of the meters first. I read the New York Times article you referenced. Of course, one of your colleagues from Kern County has talked a good bit about this in the media. You have to start out with the premise that, number one, the so-called smart meters, these are meters made by General Electric and Landis+Gyr. There's been over 70 million of these meters installed worldwide, 30 million in Italy, for example. The meter is an inanimate object. There's nothing in the meter that, there's no little gnome or something that plays around and changes the numbers. But in response to concerns that have been articulated in Kern County by Senator Flores, who came and met with me on this subject, we have instituted a review, or hiring a consultant to look into the meters and their proficiency and accuracy. That's we've expedited the process of being able to select a consulting firm, and we're doing that. So that, I would hope, would give people, depending on what the outcome of that is, I can't prejudge that, will give them the assurance that is...
What's the time frame on that?
Well, it should be in the next 6 months. But let's be very candid here. This state is in the process of installing 18 million new electric and gas meters. 18 million. To date, we have heard complaints about the meters from Kern County, a little bit from Fresno, and Calaveras County. They're going on in the Edison service territory. We never heard a word. It's going on in San Diego Gas and Electric. We never heard a word. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's impossible. People sometimes get things confused between the meter, changing the bill, the rate structure changes, and in some cases even weather. But we take it very seriously. I've assured Senator Flores of this, and he knows that, and we've responded to him at some length. So I think that hopefully will help allay concerns. You have to see the smart meter finally as in my opinion, and this is not a view shared by everybody, as a consumer enabling device. It's absolutely essential for people to have smart meters. Excuse me. They're the first step to programmable thermostats and the ability to remotely control the use of your appliances. And this is a very, very important thing going down the road. Also, you want to be able to have people, give them the opportunity to shift their load around and run their electric dryer or whatever it may be, air conditioning, pool pump if people are so fortunate, and so forth, at different times of the day, and off-peak use, which enhances the overall system's reliability. And should ultimately bring down costs. And so it's a consumer enabling device. And when we did a pilot project in Kern County on this, over 70% of people, wealthy and low income, like the ability to control their own electricity use by the knowledge that smart meters provide. But it's part of a smart overall grid, too, that will enhance the overall operation of the system and help us meet our climate goals. Now, and I'll just say one final word on that, Senator. We are developing a lot of wind power in California. In fact, we're developing so much wind power, there are days or nights, because it mostly blows in the evening, that a company like Edison has more wind than it can use. And the smart meter will help enable us to be able to, as we go in the direction of more hybrids and electric vehicles, which is clearly where we're going, as Chevrolet's announced and as Nissan has announced with all electric vehicles and BMW and all that, well, the meter will allow us, the smart meter, be able to allow us to have time of use rates so that if people charge their vehicle after 8 or 9 p.m., they could have a lower rate and make use of that wind power. Those are all things that make the system, number one, more effective, number two, more efficient, and number three, more environmentally sustainable. So those are all the pluses in the meter column.
Thank you, sir.
Now you asked me about environmental justice.
On that question. Right.
And the question is, was there a specific, because...
Well, there is a specific case that I'm thinking of that you may hear about through the public testimony. I'd rather not refer to a specific case. But where there are issues before the PUC that revolve around the siting of energy facilities that have impacts on specific neighborhoods, how do you go about weighing the merits of such an issue?
Well, I mean, it's one of the major factors one has to take into consideration, of course. But I think I know what you're referring to, but I will avoid that and just say that if it's a natural gas storage facility, it's because it was probably in the past a natural gas storage facility. Now, I can't speak to the exact specifics, and we do want to cite more natural gas storage facilities in California. It gives us more control over our use, summer versus winter. You buy it when it's cheap in the summer, and you store it and you use it in the winter. We've done Wild Goose and other projects up the Sacramento Valley and at Lodi just to do that. But the broader concern, I am very sensitive to being careful about where power plants are sited, so they're not solely sited in lower income areas. Now, the irony of this is that in the past in California, almost all power plants were sited along the coast, which is the very place that most people want to get and have the highest appreciation and value. So there's some ironies in this. I mean, you think of the nuclear plants, you think of all the power plants, you think in Long Beach, the Long Beach plants, and El Segundo, and Scattergood, and all these. They're right on the coast, Redondo Beach, and people now want to get rid of them and have housing in those very areas. But the environmental justice movement and the environmental justice community is something that needs a very clear and constant articulation, and it is a factor that certainly has to be weighed heavily by the Commission in decision making. Again, realizing that when you build a power plant, it's usually what you're judging is an application by a utility or an independent power company that has already selected the site, and then you have to weigh, is that the right place for it? Hayward, or in one case, or San Jose, or what have you, versus another locale, which if you go to the more distant locale, then you have more transmission costs and many other factors that go in that can run up your costs and create a different set of opposition. So, I mean, that's the balancing job that myself, my colleagues, and our staff have to try to take into account.
I may have a couple more questions on this subject after the testimony on that particular subject. Can I ask my one more topic, and then we'll definitely pass it on here. I want to ask you about the criticism that that the Commission's process is not as open to genuine public input as it should be. And this has arisen in two contexts that I can think of. One is the use of so-called advice letters that regulated utilities can file with the Commission that can serve as the basis for actual decision making without a public hearing. And the second issue is the Commission's use, and you're the chairperson, the Commission's use of the consent calendar to essentially deal with a whole host of issues, whether they be large or small, that if not eliminating public input, sort of disincentivizes public input. I'd like your response to those two criticisms, please.
Well, on the advice letter, the process, the advice letter is implemented a Commission decision. So the advice letter is very narrowly to be very narrowly construed to implement a Commission decision. We say to Southern California Edison, you're permitted to do this. Then they file an advice letter to implement that. If they stray from the strict implementation of that advice letter, then we have the ability, and we have yanked their chain and stopped and made a change. And this has happened with AT&T and others. Okay, that's number one. The consent calendar.
Wait, if I may, just so we're clear, the advice letter itself is submitted by the entity being regulated, correct?
Yes,
for
yes.
approval by. So it's not an advice letter that the Commission's giving saying, you, utility, you follow this. So
No. But the difference is that we render a decision. Then the implementation of that decision takes various steps. And the regulated company, the utility in this case, files an advice letter telling us how they're going to implement the decision we made. And if we don't think that what they have filed is in accord with our decision, then we say no. And that has happened. And it's happened repeatedly, and the AT&T case cost them $6 million. So just so we're clear on that.
Consent calendar.
The consent calendar is a process just similar to what you have here in the legislature, where a case has been heard, an application has been heard by the Commission, and all Commission officers agree to put it on the consent calendar. And then it's adopted at a motion of a Commission meeting. I make the motion, it's seconded by another Commissioner, and it's adopted. If any Commissioner chooses, any one of the 5 Commissioners chooses not to have the item on consent, it's taken off consent. So I don't make the decision that something goes on consent, nor does any single Commissioner. It's a unanimous decision. And if one Commissioner says, I don't think that ought to be on consent, even though I agreed to it last week, it's taken off consent. That's the way the process works.
I'm going to turn it over. Those are my questions. I'm going to turn it over to other Commissioners. Senator Oropeza?
Well, just to clarify, if I could, on the consent calendar question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the essence of the question had to do with access by the public to provide input. So where does that fall in the scenario of the consent calendar?
Well,
because I know it's always a factor for us as well. We got to weigh, is this a big enough issue that, even though we might all end up voting for it, we need to hear from the public, or at least give them an opportunity to weigh.
Yes, and I didn't answer that part of it. You're right. And from Mr. Steinberg, Senator Steinberg, the point, we have, I think, as open a process as any you're going to find in state government. I mean, anybody could appear and be involved in any case they choose to. Now, over time, it's become more specialized, to be very, very frank. There are groups, in addition to the utilities, there are other groups that have attorneys that they make their living appearing before the Public Utilities Commission. They're living. Mm-hmm. I mean, we paid out in intervenor funding $36 million to such groups in the past 8 years. Wow. $36 million, not a small amount of money. One of those organizations got half of that amount of money, just so we understand what we're talking about. But anybody can have an attorney and come and appear in our processes. The processes are daunting for those, unless you're an attorney or have some skill set that knows how this all operates. That's absolutely true. So at the beginning of every commission meeting, like we'll have tomorrow, we have a public period. And anybody can get up and speak at those, and has. And many times we get many, many people. Today we had a hearing for 2 hours, not as a part of the regular commission agenda, but on the problem of utility shutoffs, particularly of people given the economic climate and all that. And we had 10 public speakers or so after the utilities and turn and greenlining and all of this and DRA and all presented their cases. So I think we have a very open process, going to be improved. Perhaps it can be, but everybody has an opportunity to come and speak either in a formal case or informally at a public hearing.
And if during the course of that public opinion period, it becomes apparent that numerous people are talking on an item that's on consent, to the members of the board at that point have the right and authority to ask that that item be pulled for further
Absolutely,
discussion.
or put over, and both have happened.
All right. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Peavy, and I'd like to begin by saying welcome, and it's nice to see you here. We've known each other a very long time, and I admire your work over time, both in higher education and in this realm. That's how we got to know each other initially.
You were a student leader.
Well, and you were a trustee as well.
There we are. Okay. We've kept the age differential.
Yeah. Although I feel older by the minute, and I'm sure you don't. Let me take you back not that far, but to the summer of 2006 when there was a heat wave in Southern California that really had put serious pressure on the system. And at that time, as leader of the PUC, you issued an emergency order requiring Edison to develop 5 additional peaker plants.
Correct.
And 4 of them are done. 1 is not, and that's the Oxnard site. And I have to say, I would like to ask you a couple questions about that particular site. I'd like to ask you if, given that the peaker demands on the system are not what they were then when you issued that executive order, or what is it called, an emergency order, and we are not in emergency right now, whether given, in terms of peakers, as I understand it, whether or not it would make sense for you to have the full commission review whether that site is now necessary given its coastal proximity and the fact that the city of Oxnard already has 2 power plants, 3 landfills, and an EPA Superfund site. And this goes to the environmental justice thing that we were talking about a little while ago. It is a big concern for me. I certainly would accede to people smarter than me about these issues, but I have to say, on its face, given the dynamic we're in now, it seems like the full commission might want to take a look at it, a second look at it. Well, it wasn't a commission decision. It was an emergency order. What do you think about that? Would it be possible for the commission to?
Yes, but it is a commission decision, even though it's an emergency order. I mean, the commission accedes. Here is the point. We had, as you described, near a brownout, blackout conditions, right, because this was all over the state. It wasn't just Southern California. It was all over the state. 2 weeks in a row, summer of 2006. The governor then asked me, he said, can you get some peakers in so we could not have this situation ever happen again? And we ended up, frankly, the governor, myself, and others talking about this. He originally wanted 10 peakers. We agreed on 5, and we decided to build up the air conditioning cycling program, the Edison Company, to get the same equivalent for the other as the other 5 would do. That's been successful. Edison determined the location of the 5 peakers. And they have growing load in Ventura, and particularly Ventura County, as well as in Santa Barbara, particularly Ventura County. And it was their determination that the peakers should be built there outside of Oxnard, or at the border of Oxnard there. It's been very contentious. It's never happened, as you said. And it may never happen. But I think it's fair to say that in terms of engineering a system, that you need a peaker in that location. That doesn't mean you need it in that specific physical site. You know, it could be 2 miles this way or 2 miles that way, something of that type. But you need that kind of reserve and that kind of generation for the system reliability purposes and for the system to keep what's called balance and all. You need it in that location. You can't just put them all in Malibu or whatever would be the case.
So the technology of it, or the reality of it, is that peaker plants have to be placed where the demand is?
They have to be placed in a rough sense where the demand is and where there's transmission and where there may be not just demand, but some aspects of the system may be less reliable and others have less redundancy and so forth.
Can I ask that, when I described the Oxnard dynamic in terms of what else is going on in Oxnard, the other thing that's going on is that is the lowest income and most Latino community within Ventura County. All right, it's 70% Latino, and its income demographic is not high.
Right. No, I'm quite aware of it.
And so I just am wondering if it would be possible, given that this was approved by Edison, or cited by Edison, and then it was cited by Edison at a time when we were as part of a plan for an emergency response that at this point in time we are not in. We are not in the kind of emergency we were in that summer when that call was made. And within 3 years, those other 4 came online. We're now in 2009, almost 2010. And all I'm really asking is if there would be a way for the commission to look at whether it's still, whether it still makes sense that under that emergency plan, this plant, which is not, as you said, has not been built yet, and maybe it will never be built, but there's no guarantee on that at this point, to take another look at it, given the dynamics of today. Would it be possible? I mean, is that something
that's kind of an ongoing process. I mean, you have the people of Oxnard, the city manager and supervisor and local officials have met with us.
The city doesn't want it.
But they have another location 2 miles away. They want to put it someplace else.
Oh, okay.
Very close.
Within their,
Well, it's not within the city limits. They want to put it over in
but it's within 2 miles or so.
Yeah, 2 to 3 miles. I can't remember the exact.
Okay.
I mean, they've shown me the maps and all that. We've taken a look at this. It's trying to weigh all this is very difficult. But the need, but I don't want to mislead you. The need for the peakers was because we had this incredible heat wave. Now, it's true that the economic downturn has reduced demand to some extent, and so we have a little more time than we would otherwise have had. Unfortunately, but that's the case. But the need for peakers was because that we came within a hair's breadth of having blackouts in Southern California.
Yes,
if one of the nuclear units at San Onofre had gone out of service at that time, you would have rolling blackouts throughout Southern California. So the peakers took a year to build. Those 4 peakers, they didn't go into service until the summer of the next year.
Right.
And load growth has continued in Ventura County, although at a diminished rate. You need some augmenting generation there, whether it's a peaker plant or some other form there. We can't get it all through energy efficiency and so forth. The exact location of it is a different matter. And as I said, the city itself has proposed different locations.
Mm-hmm. And so, what does that mean for my question?
What it means for your question is to be continued. That it's not resolved.
Continued. So the answer is that the commission at this, it doesn't elevate to the commission.
Oh yes, ultimately it'll be a commission decision.
It will be a commission decision ultimately.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And I know you. I'm hoping that although we haven't spent a huge amount of time on environmental justice, at least I want to convey to you as a member of this committee, and somebody's going to be around a little while, God willing, how concerned I am about those other issues being a part of the decision-making process, and it not be solely a decision, or even, well, solely a decision based on those other factors like, transmission, which I've heard over and over again as a reason why we can't do things, and other factors that are considered. Okay,
sure.
So I'm just conveying that to you as a concern and hoping that you'll take it and do something with it. Do something good with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Onnested.
Mr. Levy, welcome. You just made the statement that we can't do it all through energy efficiency. We do need more power plants, whether they're peaker plants or whatever kind of power plants. But I'm a little confused because at the very beginning of your testimony, well over an hour ago, you gave the example of all of the, you said short of, you're not suggesting, short-circuiting CEQA, but we can build the same plant much faster in Nevada, a mile across the state line, than we can on our side where the desert tortoise is being used as the excuse to stop. And yet, in subsequent testimony regarding the requirements that, where are we on the 20%, and we're behind, but you think by the year 2013 we can get there. I'm afraid to ask now that it's 30%, where you think that may pan out if it's and whether or not that's even a reasonable or a needed goal. But I think where my confusion comes from is the fact that you seem to think, in response to Senator Steinberg's question about do we mandate that this energy be made in California, and you said no, it's all settled out and it's going to happen, that it's going to come from California, and you gave reasons, and yet the very first part of your statement was all of the regulatory or impediments put there by government of some sort at some level as to why we are so far behind now. I can't reconcile the two. How do you expect investors to come to California and invest in power plants with the kind of business regulatory climate that we have and expect to achieve the goals without becoming more competitive with, say, an Arizona or a Nevada? It isn't jiving, and I'm just wondering if you could enlighten me.
Well, what I was trying to do in response to Senator Steinberg's question is show the full dimension of the challenge in question here. That there are things that we could do in California to facilitate power plants being built in this state that we probably ought to be doing as part of this RPS legislation. But there is no shortage of people that want to build new power plants in California, both conventional and renewable. I mean, we've approved a transmission line from San Diego to the Imperial Valley. There are people lined up to build power plants there, led by Sterling, which is a large solar company, but there's a whole host of others. We have the old transmission line that goes through Senator Dutton's district from the old Mojave Edison plant over to Lugo. That coal plant has been closed down. There are 6,000 megawatts of applicants to go on that want to build projects that will go on that 1,200 kV, that 1,200 megawatt line. So, and the example I gave on the Desert Tortoise was within the boundaries of California. My point was that we have to look at all these factors and weighing them. We have the ability to develop in the Owens Valley, where the Department of Water and Power is very interested, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, in developing solar. and where they own the land, and also there's plenty, and we're doing tremendous amount of development.
I understand that, sir, but there's a question about the ability to do it and the reality of it being done when competitively, if we move it across the state line, that power plant is much cheaper to build and can send cheaper electricity to California if it's 1 mile across the state line than it is in California. How do we reconcile that?
And what I'm not here. I'm not here to tell you what to craft in a bill for next year, other than I would hope that some attention would be paid to the fact of making sure that there is not a overwhelming competitive advantage out of state to in-state.
What about electrical rates?
What about electrical rates?
The difference in cost, being able to supply electricity to California with out-of-state energy versus the new regulations that we have now.
I had an agency that has to be concerned about rates, very much so. We are a consumer agency in that regard. That's one of the factors that gives me pause about some of this, because, I mean, if you're a developer and could build at a shorter period of time in Oregon than you can in California, and the cost of bringing the power, it's the same, that's wind energy, and it's the same cost whether you construct in Oregon, or you can't construct in California. It takes you 3 years to build in California. You're in Oregon, and therefore the costs are going to be significantly higher in California. It's one of those things that gives me pause about exclusively building in California. Obviously, I want to see as much built in California as we possibly can. I'd love to see it be 100%. I mean, it's great to have all California jobs. But I also realize we are part of a region. And remember, we import 25% of our power today into California from largely from the Pacific Northwest, but also Nevada and Arizona. So we are part of a region. I'm just trying to find the right balance that doesn't penalize unduly California consumers while we meet our environmental and our job goals that are very important to me.
A large portion of my district relies on hydroelectric power, and yet that's not existing hydroelectric power is not included in the renewable energy package that this legislature put out. Can I have your reaction to that? Let me give you an example. Trinity Utility District. When they built the dam, the federal government built the dam, they told the customers in the Trinity Utility District area, you can have this cheap electricity forever. They have much more electricity than they can use, and yet there are attempts to make the Trinity Utility District go out and buy renewable energy that is generated under the new regulations, not even being able to use the excess electricity that they have and not being able to export it. Can I have your reaction?
Well, look, here's 30. The definition of renewable hydro in California is 30 megawatts or less. So that's an artifact. The legislature created that. The legislature can change that.
Are you recommending we do?
There's nothing sacred about 30 megawatts.
Are you recommending that we do?
I think you ought to take a careful look at that. I don't want to get into your domain here. I have enough to do.
However, I would like to see some expertise injected into the legislative debate.
I mean, let me put it this way: whether it's a 200 megawatt hydro dam producing 200 megawatts or a 30 megawatt one, hydroelectricity is a renewable resource. There's no question about that. That's the way it's considered in almost the entire world, that way.
And as I understand it, if I may,
Maine, whatever, every other state counts it that.
Trinity itself was allowed to count its hydro as part of the legislation that was contemplated last year, and the agency itself, as I understand it, was neutral on the bill.
And that is correct. What Senator Steinberg is correct. But you don't allow PG&E to count its hydro if it's over 30 megawatts as a renewable. And PG&E has 4,000 megawatts of hydro that's over 4,000 megawatts, and it's defined as non-renewable. If PG&E counted that along with it's 13 to 14% renewable, today it'd be over 33%. So just so you get a sense of the numbers and how they play.
And that's my point. It took considerable effort to make sure that people understood what was going on in Trinity County, and without Mr. Peavy's help, it wouldn't have happened. But
But it happened.
I've got 11 other rural counties where the same problem applies, where we have hydroelectric plants that we cannot use as part of the renewable package. Doesn't make sense.
No, Senator Steinberg, believe me, I'm not courting him. He has it right. I mean, under this statute, you have allowed.
As usual.
It may not be. It may not be the wisest decision, but it is a decision that the municipal utilities can determine what is their renewable resource and what is not. That's absolutely correct. And some of them consider large hydro as a renewable resource. You have Northern California Power Agency, NCPA, says they're 38% renewable today. The only way you get there is counting these large things. DWP, Los Angeles, will do the same kind of thing. So in some ways, when we say the utilities are this, that PG&E is this and all that, it misses the true picture because we're comparing apples and oranges.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Cedillo. Senator Dutton.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Commissioner. I do have a couple of questions. May I'll kind of start out by going a little bit on with your comment about regulator as opposed to a policymaker. It would seem over the years, though, that the PUC has actually been more legislative in some areas than policy implementer or policymaker, as opposed to actually just looking to be a regulator for what is passed by the legislature. And I reminded about the California Solar Initiative. We were working on SB 1. That was a Senate bill by Murray, and it seemed like the PUC went off on its own direction, developing that while the legislature was currently trying to deal with the legislation. PUC kind of went on its own. And there's been other cases where, the California Institute of Climate Change Solutions, that was another one. I have a little concern about going in that direction because you do seem to be legislating more than just implementing policy.
I plead guilty to some extent in that. Honestly, but let's take the solar initiative as an example. As I recall it, it was sponsored by both Senator Murray and also Senator, now Congressmember Campbell. Mm-hmm. For 2 years, the legislature tried to pass this, and it didn't happen for a variety of reasons. The governor asked me, said, can you, I'm committed to 1 million solar homes. I want to see this. Nothing is happening in the legislature. Can the PUC do something about this? And I said, we'll take a look at it and get back to you in 90 days. And we did. We said we could do these things, A, B, C, and D. We can't do E and F. It takes legislation to do E and F. The other things are consistent with our regulatory authority and constitutional agency and so forth. And we did. And lo and behold, the next year the legislature took what we did plus a few more things and added to the statute that became Murray's bill. That's exactly what happened.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about cost. I was reminded just before I came up here, my wife was paying bills again, and she periodically will ask me, she says, she reads about how we're becoming more energy efficient, we use less power and so forth, and her question is, she does the comparison over the last few years, and she says, yeah, we're using less power, but how come it's costing me more? Okay, so I think it may be a little disingenuous to the general public. They don't understand. I appreciate what people may be talking about, but I am a little concerned about letting the people know, yeah, we're doing this great job, and California is some of the most energy efficient states in the entire nation, and yet we pay the highest cost of most states. And it was like the U.S. Energy Information Administration through 2009 came up with that Californians are paying 45% more for electricity than the national average. Now, it seems to me like that's also creating part of the problem with a lot of the people, especially today, with the high cost of living and trying to do business here in California is this excessive energy cost. But it would seem to me like it's more the policies that are coming into play that are driving that cost than actually looking at better forms of energy or anything else.
There are two considerations here. First place, California rates are higher than the national average. There's no question about that. And part of it is driven by the fact that over half the electricity in the United States is generated by coal, which we don't use, or very, very modest amounts. The biggest use of coal is by Southern California municipal utilities, and that price is going to go steadily up as we deal with climate change as an issue, very frankly, coal. But you also have to be careful when you're in these rate comparisons, because if you look, it's just strictly the rate. It's so much per kilowatt hour. Californians use less electricity than most other places in the United States. We have more temperate climate. We use less in the winter, and we use less in the summer on average. So most people that come from the east and Midwest or from the deep south come to California and say, well, my overall electric bill is about the same because while the rate is higher, the usage is less. I don't have the air. I mean, you come from Florida, California, you think you've come to heaven because you're not running an air conditioner 12, 16 hours a day, 10 months of the year and all. So there are trade-offs here that those kind of simple comparisons that someone will do on a business climate kind of survey miss.
Well, my wife isn't looking to start a business. She's actually just trying to manage the household budget. So from her perspective, she's looking at X number of dollars coming in and X number of dollars going out.
Well, and the other thing, though, here...
And Senator Dutton's taking a pay cut.
And I'm taking a pay cut. She reminds me of that, too. So.
Yeah. Well, I took a pay cut, too.
Well, here's what I'm coming down to.
Both members of my household have taken pay cuts.
You said a couple of things I agree with you. I think, frankly, if we were going to do anything, rather than import power, we ought to be aggressively building power plants to export the type of power that we feel that should be developed. We do put ourselves at a burden, a little added problem, because with the increase in the renewable energy mandate that we've self-imposed by the governor's directive, the Ratepayers Advocate Office has put a pretty high price tag on that to the ratepayers of California. And I don't think people fully realize when we're talking ratepayers, we're talking families, we're talking about their family budgets, and we can't just pass that burden on through a tier system to a business or anybody else. I mean, there is an actual cost, and it just seems to me you've got a degree in economics, and it would seem to me, I mean, I would give me a great deal of comfort because you would be that kind of person that would be able to do the benefit cost analysis to make sure that the actual cost of achieving this objective is being achieved on a sound economic basis, so that we aren't just throwing away the economy and jobs and things. And so I'm really kind of relying on you, because of your professional background as well, to be able to be that person. And so maybe you can give me some comments about...
Well, and our staff has done that. And our energy division, we put out a study what it would cost to 33%. What it would cost to get to 33% renewables, and it's 7 to 10% higher than not going down that route and going maybe to 25% renewables or something like this. Put that in perspective, that's about 0.5% a year over a period of time more than would otherwise be the case. So, in the end of the day, it's kind of up to all of us collectively whether that's a price we wish to pay for the society we wish to have in this state. I think that I would like to see it done as economically as possible, which is the point it's trying to make here, trying to do all this balancing, which is very tough because you never make everybody happy or anybody happy at any one time. It's also compounded the rates by the fact that during the energy crisis, legislation was passed, AB 1X, that froze the Tier 1 and Tier 2 rates, and they have remained frozen until January of next year. And we all pay Tier 1 and Tier 2 rates, but that has forced everything else on the residential side to go in, this is the IOU customers, to go into Tier 3, 4, and 5. And if you have a good-sized home or you have good air conditioning, you have a pool, you're going to be up in that grouping, and those rates have gone up much more than the overall system average. This was the legislature. Now you passed SB 695 this past year. The governor signed into law by Kehoe that is the first step towards some alleviation of that. and was supported in the end by consumer groups and the utilities and so forth. So,
Senator Dutton, appropriately and effusively has stoked the debate in the legislature and the Senate about AB 32 and the cost benefit, and it's a debate that we've had and we will continue to have, a very, very important debate. And yet, as I heard Senator Dutton's question, I just want to interpose the following as well, and that is that I hope that your analysis, the PUC's analysis over time, also reflects the costs of continuing down the road of a carbon-based energy economy. Because in my view, that has a significant cost as well.
Yes, it does.
And so just make sure that we're always comparing apples to apples here. The 7 to 10% compared with the cost of not shifting to alternative energy. Your analysis, objective analysis on those very questions will help guide some of the decisions we're going to be called upon to make over the year and years ahead.
Yeah,
You want the last word on that?
Yeah, and I actually, well, I haven't even got last word. But I would concur with that, and I think that's where some of the frustrations come from. I don't have any problems with the objective. What I'm trying to do is we seem to exclude a lot of things that other states do not exclude from there, or even other countries. And therefore, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. And so I don't mind being a little bit higher standard. I just don't want to be so high that I put myself at a disadvantage and therefore create economic hardship with the people of California, because, there are some things that we don't allow that other countries do, nuclear power being one of them. We did hearings down in San Diego. I think you even attended those a couple of years ago with Christine Keough. We also have some other issues regarding some of the things, a lot of states use coal. We have natural gas. We have siting problems. We have people that are trying to repower plants, and they even have trouble doing it, where we could actually generate more power through natural gas, and yet we run into all these problems, and they'd actually solve some of the environmental problems. So what I'm looking for is not so much trying to get away from the idea of trying to not reduce our dependency on a carbon base, but what I'm trying to do is put some common sense into it, but also make sure we don't disallow some of the other options. And you obviously, with your background and experience, you know what those options are and how to balance the goals and objectives to get to that perfect society, and at the same token do it in a way that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So.
If I could couple what you and Senator Steinbridge said, the challenge is to going forward, in my view, is to reduce our carbon intensity significantly. It helps our economy to do that if the other flip side is we invest in new technologies and continue to spur new technological improvements, innovation, and development. We have about half the venture capital money in the United States it comes into this state and is spent in this state. But we have to nurture and promote the kind of industries that can grow out of that. And something like we just a few months ago, we got a big grant from the DOE to today we take petroleum coke, we send it to the Far East. It's the most polluting, it's like coal, the most polluting thing. In the future, we're going to take it into Kern County, turn it into hydrogen. The hydrogen will power a power plant and will sequester the CO2 in underground and get more oil out of it. We won't be sending it overseas. Those kind of technological changes and improvements are the kind of things we have to foster and promote in this state if we're going to be able to achieve the kind of goals that I think we all want for California without an excessive price.
Okay. I want to open it up for the public testimony, but I want to make one more sort of plea, one more advocacy in terms of what's on your plate. Okay. In addition to looking very carefully at these issues of environmental justice, especially when it comes to siting. It's one thing when you're talking about the desert. It's another thing when you're talking about residential neighborhood, especially low-income neighborhood. And I believe that you ought to give special attention to ensuring that low-income neighborhoods are protected when it comes to that balance. So that's the one thing. But here's the other thing. Senator Dutton asked you about your Climate Institute initiative. And your critics might say at times that you push the envelope very, very hard, and that was maybe a controversy over whether or not that was your prerogative or it should have been the legislative prerogative. You said that here's an area where I urge you to push the envelope and compete with the legislature. I don't care. Just go. And that is this. You have, for example, the PEER funds, the alternative energy funds. I would love to see the PUC lead an initiative that invests in career education for high school students linked to alternative energy and this new green economy that we're talking about. This is what's being missed here. We argue about economic policy, we argue about environmental policy, we're now arguing, so I got to get upstairs in a little bit to argue about education policy and the race to the top. Leaders like yourself, and we're certainly not setting aside our own responsibility here, I think have a unique opportunity to put these issues together in a profound way. And with the resources at your disposal and with your history of creativity and willingness to push the envelope, to make part of the PUC's mission to help reduce California's dropout rate by connecting this emerging green economy, alternative energy, and public education reform, you'll make some enemies along the way, and this isn't your business, this isn't your jurisdiction. I'll tell you, for one, I have your back all the way. Why shouldn't the money you wanted to use for the Climate Institute, good idea, important idea, be used instead to fund, or in addition to fund these sorts of career pathways for kids who need the opportunity, and where California is going to need a high-skilled, highly educated workforce for this green economy. And I'd love to see you, Mike, Mr. Peavy, make that one of your causes in your second term, if you're confirmed with the PUC.
Just a very brief comment on that. Number one, it was an integral part of the Climate Institute proposal to do that. And that's why the community colleges would have been involved.
High schools.
I know, I heard you. But secondly, I accept the challenge. I think it's a hell of an idea because I just spoke a few weeks ago at Berkeley High, which is PG&E is adopted as one of a whole series of high schools, 2 here in Sacramento, on high school green training, training for green jobs. And I think there's much that could be expanded there. And with the encouragement of the Senate and of the legislature, we will move we'll move more dramatically in that direction, because I share with you that the challenge for this state, for the workforce development in this state, that we're not producing enough people that are adequately trained for the workforce in the future.
No pride of authorship on this subject.
I got it.
Go. All right. Witnesses in support.
Martha's going to stand. I'm going to sit.
Welcome our former colleague here.
Thank you, members and Mr. Chairman. First of all, when I entered the legislature in 1992, my PUC chairman was Dan Fessler.
So professor.
I started with Dan Fessler and I ended with Michael Peavy. And Michael will be the first one to tell you, and Michael, I'm going to tell our story, that I was probably the most difficult vote that he had to get in, was 2000? I was the most difficult vote that he had to get in 2000 for him to convince me to vote for him for PUC chairman. And I have to tell you, Michael, almost 10 years later, I don't regret the vote. I do not regret the vote. I'm here in my capacity as a board member of the California Emerging Technology Fund. The CETF fund, members, is a fund that was started as a result of, it basically reflects the public benefits component of the AT&T SBC merger and Verizon MCI merger. We tried to do it in the state legislature, myself and then Assembly Member Mark Ridley Thomas. The bill got killed, thank God that Mr. Peavy and Ms. Kennedy were watching this, and they incorporated that as a good thing to do as part of the opinion for the approval of the merger. That resulted in monies that funded this program. And let me tell you, you talk a lot about here about what Michael has done in the PUC. There's a lot of stuff that he has done that no one even is aware of. Because ultimately we do live in a rather insular world here in the state capitol, and all we do is just get lots of letters from, groups that have their lobbyists, and you get the letters. But trying to go beyond that is very difficult for us in these very isolated lives that we lead. I can tell you that now with the benefit of having been 3 years outside of this building. And that there is a real world out there, and there's a lot. It's far more complex than what it is from what we live here day to day. In 2007, after I had left the state legislature, Mr. Peavy called me up and asked me whether I would serve as the board of directors of the CETF board, and I said absolutely. And let me tell you, exactly what you're talking about in terms of education, that's exactly what Mr. Peavy and the board of directors are doing at CETF Fund. But it's under Mr. Peavy's leadership, who is our chairman of that board, who has started the School to Home program, in which I am the lead director, and we anticipate that we are going to get to 539 middle schools. Middle schools. And we're going to get computers to those kids in partnership with the Children's Partnership, as well as other stakeholders. And we're basically going to address the issue of digital literacy, as well as academic achievement, by basically using the promise of that computer and how that conveys knowledge to the children, especially at middle schools. We're kicking off the program next year with 25 middle schools. That's a program no one hears about. No one hears about Mr. Peavy being the spearhead of that. No one hears about the fact that Mr. Peavy also spearheaded the California Telehealth Network, and the fact that as a board, he led the fight to make sure that we would give, as a board, $3.5 million to the state of California in order to draw down a $20 million grant from the FCC in order to provide health care to rural communities that have no access to doctors or to nurses, and we can do that by way of telemedicine. Those are the stories that you'll never hear in the Capitol because there aren't any paid lobbyists to tell the stories. But yet it is Mr. Peavy who has been the one that has spearheaded that. And for me, it's with great pride that I come here to testify for his reconfirmation. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much, Senator Scudia. It means a lot.
I'm going next.
Ms. Professor.
Thank you.
O'Connor.
I, too, serve on the board of the California...
Identify yourself, please.
I'm sorry.
We all know you, but...
I'm Barbara O'Connor. I've been teaching at Sac State for 37 years and will retire in June. And I teach telecommunications, so I know more about it than anyone ever wants to hear. I have worked with Mike for a long time. He and Don Weil before him sort of steered me in the direction of telecommunications, although Mike was in energy. And I'm an officer of the California Emerging Technology Fund and have worked with him in that context. I can tell you honestly, because I've intervened on behalf of the people of California since 1984, as chair of the Public Broadcasting Commission, as chair of the Educational Technology Commission, and as director of the Institute for the Study of Politics and Media at Sac State, that Michael's a leader in telecommunications. And I don't know energy, so I won't purport to go there. But I know telecom cold. And Mike has been terrific. Whenever he has had an opportunity to aggregate demand, to bring people together who don't normally talk to each other, to bring in federal funds. We have $1.6 billion pending right now in telecom funds in ERA. Mike has been terrific. And he makes enemies because he's candid and blunt, and I like that about him. But I think you could do nothing better than confirm him for a term. He deserves to be there. He has been absolutely splendid to work with. I enjoy meeting with him and dealing with him. And I will continue to do that as an officer of CETF. I feel compelled to say I've also enjoyed working with Commissioner Chong, and I'm sorry I'm not here to help her today, and I understand why, but she has been absolutely splendid as well on telecom. So thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Connor.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Sunny McPeak. I'm with the California Emerging Technology Fund, and the Honorable Martha Scutia and Dr. O'Connor are two of my directors. Mr. Peavy is our chairman. You've heard their eloquence from Martha and Barbara as to what he has done. focused fiercely on closing the digital divide in California, bringing that passion for reaching out and including all Californians, coupled with the business expertise that he obviously also displays. Adding to what you've just heard, I will say he has also been the person who has focused in on California getting its fair share of dollars from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act for broadband, for high-speed internet access, and he has been the one who's personally kicked off our whole Get Connected campaign to reach low-income, non-English speaking families to become part of the 21st century digital economy. I'll conclude by saying you do have the letter from all of the directors of the California Emerging Technology Fund, except Mr. Peavy, he didn't sign for himself, which we submitted in August, and it was a letter that was on behalf of and in favor of both the confirmation of President Peavy and Commissioner Chong. We do urge and request that you confirm President Peavy.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you very much.
Just add one sentence that I forgot.
Senatorial courtesy.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
I think this will be of interest to some of the senators, especially Senator Lopez, and I'm sorry that Senator Cedillo is not here, but I am convinced that Mr. Peavy's legacy will be his diversity in legal services and financial services initiative at the PUC. When I was the chairwoman of the committee, he would ask me and even former Assemblywoman Gwen Moore to sit en banc at a PUC hearing in which we would sit as commissioners and we would basically hear the efforts of the power utility companies to diversify their subcontracting practices so that to make sure that everybody, got a benefit of that economic pie. And Mr. Peavy has taken it to another level, saying, okay, let's make sure that attorneys and accountants and other professionals that are hired by the utility companies reflect the complexity of the new California. And I'm really convinced that, if anything, that's also going to be one of his initiatives. So I thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you again. If we ask witnesses just, if you can be concise, we'd appreciate it. We have a... Yeah.
Ask that once you've spoken, you give somebody else your chair.
Very good. Real brief, please.
Stephen Kelly with the Independent Energy Producers Association. We support the confirmation of President Peavy. Over the last 5 years, the energy business has been very trying in a challenge, and we certainly think that the same will be true going forward for the next 5 years, and President Peavy has certainly proven himself up to the task, and we look for the continuity of leadership in that respect.
Thank you very much.
And I'm Jose Perez. I'm here representing the Latino Journal and a couple other hats from individuals who couldn't stay with us because they had to catch flights, including the Latin Business Association and the Spanish Language Academy. And we all support the confirmation of President Peavy to the Public Utilities Commission. And I just handed out a copy of the California Utilities Diversity Council annual report to the Public Utilities Commission, which Senator Steinberg does address the two key items that you mentioned. One is how do you work to bring more people to become knowledgeable about the work of the Public Utilities Commission, which affects so many of us. And over the course of the last 7 years, the Public Utilities Commission, through the leadership of President Peavy, has done outreach to bring in trade associations, community-based groups, and we manifest ourselves as the California Utilities Diversity Council. The second point I just wanted to quickly make is the education initiative on the Employment Committee, and that report shows some of the work that is being done in order to look at workforce preparation as it relates to renewable energy sector, which is a very key ingredient.
Just want to, computer literacy, computers, the technology is all great. The next step is to take all that technology and begin creating career pathways for young people as early as middle school so that they're focused on the relevance between what they're being asked to learn and what they might do with their lives. Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Next. Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
Thank you. My name is Jack Hawks, California Water Association. My group represents the water utilities that are regulated by the PUC. We all know President Peavy's an expert on energy. I'm here to assure the committee that he gets it on water as well. Under his leadership, the PUC conceived and implemented a water action plan somewhat comparable to the energy action plan back at the end of '05, and the utilities have been implementing that plan ever since. The Commission will be undertaking a new one next year. The point there is that the execution of that plan has ended up dovetailing very nicely with the water legislative package that passed, especially SB 7X. And secondly, President Peevey gets it on what's going on in the water industry today. And what's going on is that water purveyors are looking to develop more local sourced supply of water. And President Peevey has taken the time to come down to Southern California, visit with utilities, see how they're cleaning up contaminated aquifers and trying to develop some of that local source supply, reduce our dependence on imported and purchased water. And,
thank you very much.
Support his confirmation.
We'll have to look at that water issue sometime in the legislature. Okay. Good. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Steinberg and members. Brian Crabb on behalf of First Solar, one of the largest solar developers in California and under the California RPS. President Peevey has been a true champion for renewable development in California. President Peevey has been a true champion for renewable development, specifically
for renewable
development in California. And we're honored to support his confirmation.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lara Ettinson with the Natural Resources Defense Council. NRDC supports President Peevey's confirmation. He has helped make California a leader in energy efficiency and climate solution policies, and we look forward to working with him and the legislature to continue our progress.
Thank you very much, Ms. Edison.
My name is Will Johnson. I'm president of Visage Energy. I've been working quite closely with President Peevey, the Energy Commission, Commissioner Boyd on projects with the National Energy Technology Lab over the past 4 years. At a meeting just last month, the director of the lab indicated that he had either spent or committed to spend $600 million in California on research and development. A lot of that was some of the support we've gotten from President Peevey. In addition to that, on January 19th and 20th, we're going to be having a meeting with the Energy Commission, CPUC, the ISO, and there will be the Assistant Secretary of Energy, Jim Markowski, who was recently confirmed by the Senate, and he's going to be responsible for spending $1 trillion on a national grid over the next 10 years. And he's coming to California because he's impressed with this collaborative that we've had between the Energy Commission and the Public Utility Commission, because he thinks that he's going to have to export that to the rest of America. He's coming here because a huge amount of renewables that we've already figured out how to integrate into the grid, that's just a dress rehearsal for what the country's going to have to do on a national type basis. So I think his leadership has been very valuable to California. Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Mr. Chair, members, Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council. We strongly support Mr. Peevey's confirmation to the PUC, and also look forward to working with him on the renewable energy projects as well as the Career Technical Education Initiative. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Senators, my name is Otto Duffy. I'm a San Francisco neighborhood activist. I'm from Willie Brown's old assembly district. I'm from City Supervisor District 6, a district of 75,000 people. Specifically, I'm from the Tenderloin North of Market neighborhood, a neighborhood of about 29,000 people that live within less than 1/2 a square mile. It's a complex neighborhood of Asians, Southeast Asians, Latinos, Central Americans, blacks. It's got families, single adults, children, retirees, workers, and a lot of disabled people. It's quite a complex neighborhood of 29,000 people. My own city supervisor, when he speaks, he will not claim that he can speak completely for a neighborhood of this complexity. For all
Sir,
of its needs
what
and
about
wishes.
your view on Mr. Peevey's confirmation?
Well, I support Mr. Peevey. I think Mr. Peevey is the person who could. What I believe the Public Utility Commission needs is public input and accessibility process. I think Mr. Peevey is a person to do that. And my describing where my neighborhood is from and the complexity of it is that different people in different neighborhoods with different circumstances, the provision of service models has differing effects. And the whole point of the Public Utilities Commission is to even out those effects, make sure no burden is borne unduly by any community, and that all people have minimum service standards. And I think Commissioner Peavy will be able to achieve that.
Thank you for coming to Sacramento to testify. We appreciate it. Sir.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Sam Kang, Managing Attorney for the Green Line Institute, and I'm here. Of course, my name is Sam Kang from the Green Lining Institute.
K-A-N-G, correct?
That's correct, sir. And I'm here to put the exclamation point on the day, hopefully. Green Line represents 38 member coalitions stretching from Sacramento all the way to Phoenix, Arizona. We represent 3 of the largest African American churches in the state, the Asian Business Association, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the African Chamber of Commerce, as well as one of the largest pan-ethnic organizations in the state of California. And I'm speaking on behalf of all of them and offering our full confidence in the confirmation of President Mike Peavy. Let me just explain, because we stated a letter back in the summer that was a little bit unclear and it was more neutral in its flavor. Since then, let me back up. Green Lining's relationship with President Peavy has been one that's been very dynamic, would you say? But the lasting legacy that he's going to leave behind, as Senator Scutia pointed out, was that he is the champion in this country in terms of regulatory diversity. When I go back to D.C. to meet with members of the FCC, they always ask me, so what is Mike Peavy doing now at the CPUC? And that is a legacy that I'm sure he'll solidify and continue with some big issues ahead, including major rate increases, utility shutoff issues, the solar industry and renewable energy, as well as perhaps maybe even the Comcast merger, if he should be so inclined to get involved. But in the meantime, I'm just here to offer my full support on behalf of the Green Line Institute and its 38-member coalition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kang. Any other witnesses in support? Are there witnesses? Oh, Senator Montoya, I apologize. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members, I'm a voice from the past. I'm from the days of George Moscone and Bob Moretti, Jack Knox, and Bill Baglietto, known as Bill Bagley. And I just thought I would share a couple of things with you in terms of, I'm 70 years old, so I have a little bit of institutional memory. I go back with Mike Peavy before he became a politician, and by that I mean a appointed politician. He founded, or was a co-founder of, something called the California Council on Environmental and Economic Balance. It was at a time when there was bipartisanship on the part of Republicans and Democrats alike. He was one of those mainstays, kind of could bring people together, like you've seen today, all of the people who have testified before me on his behalf. I don't know that there could be a better human being, a better person that could be the continuing chairman of the Public Utilities Commission other than Mr. Peavy. I thought I sensed a little bit of dissonance on the part of the committee, but I assure you there couldn't be a better man for the position. He's been bipartisan kind of a human being forever. Actually, as some of you may know, he came from the building trades a long time ago, a California Berkeley man, a man who nonetheless served under Howard Allen, who was the Stanford Dean of the Law School, and who was had the audacity to appoint Mike as one of the 2 most important men in PUC, in the Southern California Edison. And he would just be a great appointment, and it makes me happy to be here after 20 years.
Thank you, sir.
Give my endorsement.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Are there witnesses in opposition or other? Ms. Slider.
Good afternoon. My name is Constance Slider. I'm the Vice Chair of the Avondale-Glen Elder Neighborhood Association, and we are not here opposing Mr. Peavy's confirmation today. However, we are here to raise some concerns about some conduct at the PUC and to inform this body of some recent developments. The Sacramento Natural Gas Storage Project has proposed a natural gas storage facility in the Avondale-Glen Elder neighborhood area. That is a low-income neighborhood in South Sacramento. We are the home of a brownfield cleanup site, a home to a federal Superfund site, as well as numerous refuse and recycling facility services in the area. Recently, SNGS requested a so-called procedural intervention. All parties are awaiting the final PUC release of a draft EIR and the final EIR, and the draft EIR found that the project would impose significant environmental risk of fire, explosion, and groundwater contamination due to the potential gas migration from the underground reservoir. The applicant in this proceeding, SNGS, requested a so-called procedural intervention from Mr. Peavy, which, if granted, would give SNGS an exclusive and secretive comment period on the final EIR only after the PUC's experts have drawn their final conclusions, and only if the final EIR confirms that the project would impose significant environmental impacts, as the draft has concluded. My understanding is that granting this request would be, well, actually, Mr. Peavy's office has granted the request and has met with the applicant as of earlier this week. And it is an extraordinary departure from the PUC's normal procedure. It is really appropriate to give a private, we want to know if it's really appropriate to give a private developer the chance to change the PUC's final conclusion that the developer's own project has posed that the developer's project poses significant impact. And why would any agency head second-guess his own agency's expert after a year-and-a-half-long scientific inquiry?
Okay, Ms. Slider. First of all, I'm very familiar with this issue. We're talking about my district here, and my old city council district, and a neighborhood of which I take great pride in helping work with your father, your late father, to help turn around. One of the fondest memories of my entire public service, actually. Well, what I want to, it's no, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. It's not our place here to adjudicate specific issues that are. No, that's okay. Before the commission, but I want to say, not judging the circumstances of the particular motion that you talk about, I'll say to Mr. Peavy, I would just hope that I'm not against ex parte communication, so long as the ex parte communication, that access is granted to people from all sides of a particular issue. So if that has been, in fact, the case here, and I don't want to argue it here, it would certainly be my hope and expectation that you would afford Ms. Slider and the association, who are great people, who worked tirelessly to approve a neighborhood that was part of the first integrated subdivision in the history of this country back post World War II, that they would be afforded that same opportunity.
Thank you, Chair.
Come on up to the mic if you want to respond to this, sir.
First place, I've never met with the applicant. I personally have never met with the applicant. Okay. So if that was the implication, that's absolutely false. I have never met with this applicant. Secondly, our rules prescribe if I did, I have to meet with every party in the proceeding. And we would grant you that. If I met with the applicant, I'd be happy to meet with you or anybody else. I have not. Like the legislative staff here, someone has a right to come in and talk to my staff on something. But that's not me. I'm the decision maker. I just wanted to clarify that without unduly prolonging.
And I didn't mean, I did misspeak when I said that. It was actually Mr. Peavy's staff that granted that communication.
Okay. All right.
And I will make this brief.
Please.
But I do want to just articulate that SNG's SNGS's backdoor dealings with Mr. Peavy's staff suggest that there might be some concern by our neighborhood association that they might want a change in the findings of a draft EIR, and we just would find it very suspicious if, in fact, a draft EIR came out that exposed a significant impact and a final EIR did the same, and we would just really be looking towards some sort of investigation if, in fact, that were to come through. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Thank you for bringing it to Mr. Peavy's attention. This is a public proceeding, and all is fair game, so we appreciate it. Go ahead. Sir.
Hello, I am Mark Toney. I'm Executive Director of the Utility Reform Network, TURN.
Mr. Toney.
And I'm here to express some concerns about the nomination of Michael Peavy as CPUC Commissioner. Since the presidency is actually chosen by the governor of the state, my understanding is this is about his confirmation as a commissioner. So there's a few things that we have concerns about. One has to do with the issue of ratepayer cost, ratepayer investment. And we do believe that there are, we're very concerned about cases in which the CPUC administrative law judges who will proceed over a case for several months, who are the individuals who are charged with reviewing every page of testimony submitted by all sides and for rendering what they believe is a fair and reasonable decision that has to do with the balance between cost and benefit to consumers. We do have concern that in the last 12 months there were 2 instances where President Peavy overturned basically the decisions, the proposed decisions of administrative law judges, and in both cases resulted in awarding far more ratepayer money to utility companies than his own administrative law judge awarded. So that's one area of concern. Second area of concern has to do with this whole concept of how we get the most green for the least green. Okay, how we get the most renewable energy, the most reductions in carbon emissions for the most reasonable price for people who have to pay. And one interesting thing is that leadership is a double-edged sword. And President Peavy's desire for California to be the leader in so many areas sometimes carries a large price, because being first sometimes means that you pay for the mistakes first, which is part of what we think is happening with the smart meters. Both when PG&E had to come back for a second generation of smart meters because they came in and said, we made a mistake on the first set of smart meters, we need more money, and some of the installation problems and complaints that are occurring now. We continue to have concerns as to what's going to happen with California being first on the plug-in electric vehicles and what kind of subsidies will be asked for or required in order to make that happen first.
Okay. Please conclude, Mr. Toney.
Yes. The area that we have some, that we think President Peavy has shown support for consumer issues is that he did recently instigate the investigation on smart meters. We think that was consumer-oriented. We also are pleased that he instituted the en banc on utility shutoffs. Those, we think, are steps in the right direction in terms of consumer protection, and we hope to work together with him to continue in that direction. Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toney. Maybe in your close, Mr. Peavy, you can talk very briefly about the rate cases and the difference in general between the ALJ decisions and your decisions, and you can wrap up and conclude, please.
I'll be very brief. We have over 40 administrative law judges at the Commission. They do, as Mr. Tony indicated, listen to the bulk of all the testimony given. They're also joined by a commissioner. It is the prerogative of the Commission to alter the administrative law judge's decisions, either directly. By law, the administrative law judge could refuse that, and then we have to do what's called an alternate. That has happened in, I don't know the two instances he refers to, but it's happened more than twice by myself and by others. Frankly, that's the purpose of commissioners. If you don't want to have any administrative law judge's decisions overturned, then don't have commissioners. I mean,
all right, so moved.
It's that simple.
Just a joke. Just kidding. You made a suggestion. I was just following up.
So, but I don't know the two cases he specifically is referring to, Mr. Chairman. I can't comment on those.
Okay. All right. Mr. Peavy, I'm certainly impressed with the array of people that came forward today. And, you know, there's no question that you are a leader. There's no doubt you sometimes ruffle feathers, and I think we need to continue to sort of work on the relationship, if you will, with the legislature and make sure that we're working as closely together as we can, that you continue to be sensitive to the consumer issues, which we've talked about some here today, not just in the energy area, but certainly in the telecom area. But you are an outstanding leader, and I think in this second term, I hope you forge new areas like connecting education and this new green economy, and with the same passion and creativity and intellect that you have brought to so much of your other work. So I'm very pleased to support your confirmation today. Let's take a motion and comments from other members, of course. Senator, moved by Senator Raposa. You want to make a comment? Go. Oh, just a motion. Moved by Senator Raposa, second by Senator Onnested. A comment is in order.
There's no question that Mr. Peavy is not only qualified, but we'd be out of our minds not to confirm you. The fact of the matter is, however, that there's a person here who should be considered today and is not being given her day in court. One of the speakers, Dr. O'Connor, mentioned Rachel Chong's name, who has an almost identical voting record with Mr. Peavy. And Dr. O'Connor says, but she understands. Mr. Chair, I'm here to tell you that the Republican caucus and the governor's office don't understand. We think that such a qualified candidate as Ms. Chong should have her day in court. Let the decision be made after the hearing, not prohibit her from the hearing. And that having been said on behalf of my caucus and the administration, I'm happy to vote to confirm this nominee.
You know, I appreciate you raising that. I anticipated that the issue might come up here today, and though I don't want to belabor it and I don't want to have a debate here, I do want to make a public comment because maybe it is an elephant in the room here as we proceed forward with it's not an elephant. Well, I'll choose to respond anyways briefly. First of all, if you look at the history of the relationship between the Senate and previous administrations, there have been pro tems who have made the decision to simply not confirm any long-term nominee in the last year of an administration, knowing that appointment will go long into the next governor's administration. I have not chosen to take that route because I think we ought to look at these nominees and these confirmations on their merits. I can assure you, and Ms. Sabelhouse I think will back me up on this, that I have spent untold numbers of hours working on, studying, reviewing the records of both Mr. Peevey and Ms. Chong. And I came to the conclusion that Ms. Chong is an intelligent, accomplished professional. But the record also said to me very, very clearly that when it comes to the lead area of her responsibility, namely telecom, that the direction of the Commission did not provide enough attention and sensitivity to low-income and elderly consumers. And I have been clear in conversations individually. I'm happy to talk to the Republican caucus, but there were two issues, and I don't mind stating them publicly. Number one, when it came to adjusting Lifeline, which is the telephone service for 2 million low-income and elderly consumers, I believe very strongly that Ms. Chong's proposed decision did not take into account sufficiently the affordability issues for those 2 million people. And secondly, when it came to the handling of telecommunications complaints, I was not satisfied that in reducing the backlog of complaints from 25,000 to 500, that the Commission under Ms. Chong's leadership in this particular area reduced that backlog in a way that assured that people were going to get a fair hearing and disposition on their particular complaint. And I think the evidence was very clear that thousands of cases were closed without any determination on the merits. So I don't have to make that defense. I don't have to.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
If I can just, I'm sorry for sort of stopping on the end of your comment, but the reality is that it requires 3 members of this body to not allow for any agenda item to be, so I think that there's more.
It's more than just me.
It's more, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I mean to be candid and to be clear with everybody. This is not a decision that you made by yourself.
Very fair point. I just believe in this job, right, where transparency is important. I have no hesitation in explaining my reasoning and making a difficult decision in the full light of the public. In the full light of the public here. Happy to do it. Happy to talk to anybody from any side of the issue, any member, the caucus, and that's where it stands. Senator Cedillo?
For the record, I was going to note that the Democrats at the inception of the Schwarzenegger administration, but during the time of the Davis administration, held over 100 appointments to afford the Schwarzenegger administration opportunity to make appointments, although they were legally duty-bound and timely to be made by Governor Davis. It was the Democrats who provided an opportunity for the Schwarzenegger administration to make appointments that would be serving during his tenure. So you're being very generous in evaluating any and all appointees, because frankly, we recognize that the clock is running and that many of the appointments will serve beyond the Schwarzenegger administration.
And we'll continue to take the appointments on a case-by-case basis. All right. Thank you very, very much. Let us call the roll here.
Senator Cedillo?
Senator Cedillo, aye.
Cedillo, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Oropeza? Oropeza, aye. Onnested? Onnested, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
That is a 5-0 vote. Your nomination will proceed to the floor of the Senate tomorrow and be taken up for a vote.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newman. Okay. Let us lift the call for Senator Dutton on Ms. Garcia and Mr. Plesher.
Current vote is 4-0. Senator Dutton? Aye. Dutton, aye.
Thank you. It's out 5-0 to the floor.
Do you want an agenda?
Yeah. All right, members of the public, I'm sorry, but we have a significant amount of other business here. Okay, thank you. We're going to take up the nomination of Jan Sterla as the Director of the Department of Child Support Services. We had a long hearing with Mr. Sterla here so that we could get more information on specific, specific timelines and benchmarks to measure the office's progress, given that the program ranks 51st in the nation in cost effectiveness. Mr. Sterla is well qualified, but we're going to be watching him and this agency very, very closely. We increased their budget in this terrible budget year by $18.7 million to help them improve their ability to retain caseworkers. We want to see results. With that, we'd move Mr. Sterla's confirmation. Senator Onnested, moved by Senator Onnested. Please call the roll.
Senator Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Dutton? Aye. Dutton, aye. Oropeza? Oropeza, aye. Onnested? Aye. Onnested, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's move to the Senate schedules. The adoption of the holidays, the January through March session schedule. Any questions? Senator Onnested, you want another holiday? There we go. Okay.
No, but while we're considering dropping holidays, I would think that the most rational approach would be to drop the 2 holidays that were the last approved by the legislature. I understand that the proposal is for Lincoln's birthday, which for 150 years has been, or 100 years has been traditional.
A fine Republican, I might add.
And a fine Republican. It seems to me that the only fair way to go about discussing dropping the holidays would be which ones did we approve last, and that would be my proposal.
Well, we're not really dropping Lincoln's birthday. We're combining Lincoln and Washington, and as I believe Lincoln's what date is Lincoln's actual birthday?
The 12th.
It's the 12th, which is so the 15th is closer than George Washington's, which is the 22nd. Correct. So you're really arguing on behalf of George Washington, not Abe Lincoln.
Can I just say
Senator,
I support
go.
and agree with this approach, that the dates that you all have selected are the most appropriate to 2010, and that's what we're adopting as a calendar for 2010. And I think these are the ones that make sense, and I'm supportive and would like to make the motion if you need one.
There's nothing perfect here, but I appreciate your point of view, and I'm prepared to support the motion as well. Please call the roll.
Senator Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Dutton? Aye. Dutton, aye. Oropeza? Oropeza?
Jenny?
Oropeza, aye. Onnested?
Aye.
Onnested, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Thank you very much. Session schedule number 4. Any questions on that one? Moved by Senator Onnested. Please call the roll.
Senator Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Dutton? Aye. Dutton, aye. Oropeza? Oropesa, aye. Onnested? Onnested, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Item 5, annual mail supplement. What is this, Greg?
Normally, at the beginning of the fiscal year, we increase each member's block grant entitlement by $15,000 for purposes of mail. We didn't do that this year. And we've achieved about a $300,000 potential savings so far. Some people, however, are at the point where they do need some mail money. So what I would propose is to give half a year's amount as of January 1st. That is to increase the entitlement by $7,500 for each member, and would suggest that we require that be used only for mail. And if it's not spent by the turn of the fiscal year, then that amount of money would be deducted from the block grant. You'd go back to, potentially at that point, we'll go back to the regular mail supplement.
I'd like to see us, we see any unused money going back to whatever respective leadership office for, because chances are they probably have had to make up some of the things, or there's been, people who have left office and stuff. I mean, especially this year, we've had a lot of changes in regional offices and that reflected the dollars, but maybe it'd be better to go into the respective leader's office for them to be able to use for the benefit of their respective causes.
The problem with the block grant is it's an entitlement. It's not really money. There's no real money involved. It's just, here's your call on the house's resources for whatever you want.
We had that 18% reduction anyway in the salaries, and that's going to offset some of this. I mean, that's an additional thing that's happening anyway. So, because that comes out of the 140 allocation, the whole, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's not a question of can we afford it. I mean, we can do whatever we want.
It just might be nice to let the individual offices just have their full allocation, and any surplus can always go into.
You want to put this over till January and
whatever you guys want. I mean, I was just putting that out as we can do this for now and then.
I don't know what the proposal is.
Okay, please do the
Okay, the proposal would be to give everyone's block grant an additional $7,500 entitlement to be used for mail. His proposal would be not to reharvest that at the end of the fiscal year if it wasn't used for mail purposes, but rather to let any surplus go to the leadership of the respective parties. That's a significant amount of money that would be deposited in each caucus account. And
what I don't know, $7,500 from what? What are you adding?
There is no money involved. It's an entitlement. You're entitled to spend $7,500 additional on the mail program, which is funded already through a different kind of a budget allocation.
So what does this do then?
It gives people who are short on money right now the opportunity to do more mail in the coming year.
But you said we're already entitled to the $7,500.
Well,
no, we didn't do it.
Years generally what happens. Some offices will actually accumulate it over time. Yeah.
Let's assume for a moment that I have $7,000 and I have then the $7,500. Let's assume I only spend 10. Is it last in, first out, or in terms of banking? In terms of banking in my block grant for?
Well, if you spent $7,500 if you spent $10,000 on mail, the first $7,500 would count against whatever we put in January.
Okay, that's fine.
And then the rest would be just your regular block grant.
Okay, so let's take a motion. Call the roll.
Senator Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Oropesa? Oropesa, aye. Onnested? Onnested, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Okay, good. Thank you. Number 6, Senator Corbett's request to present a resolution to the Senate staff removed by Senator Oropesa. Please call the roll.
Senators.
Well, excuse me if I may, Jane, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's combine. We got an add-on here from Senator Romero. Jim Wilson is retiring, the Chief Consultant Education. We're going to present him a resolution as well. Let's do the two. Go ahead.
Senator Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Dutton? Dutton, aye. Oropesa? Oropesa, aye. Onnested? Onnested, aye. Steinberg?
Aye.
Steinberg, aye.
Very good. Passes 5-0. Okay, let's adjourn and go into executive session here, if we might.